fair as a child with dyed hair and who likes earrings. Like whatever they say has no bearing. It's so scary in a house that allows no swearing. To see him walking around with his headphones blaring, alone in his own zone, cold and he don't care. He's a problem child. What bothers him all comes out when he talks about his dad walking out. Cause he hates him so bad that he blocks him out. If he ever saw him again, he'd probably knock him out. His thoughts are whacked. He's mad, so he's talking back, talking black, brainwashed from rock and rap. He sags his pants, blue rags, and a stocking cap. His stepfather hit him, so he socked him back and broke his nose. His house is a broken home. There's no control. He just lets his emotions go.
I cannot say I know about his heroin because I don't want to ever feel like I'm dying. I like uppers. I like to feel like I'm alive, but I don't like an upper that keeps me lasting for long because I'm not miserable like how people get, when there's levels to shit. Meth, you know what I'm saying? Crystal meth and Molly are long lasting. You need that effect for long. People who do cocaine and are not, they do it and they're functioning, and those people, they can, I don't know. And I'm like really high as fuck right now, and I don't like that type of shit, so I don't mean to tell you my business, but I'm super high because I feel like people don't know what the fuck they're doing to people, and they sell shit that's fucked up, and that's not good. That's not cool. Like,
trying to build a prison.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Got your little young Mark Wahlberg thing going, huh?
You know what? It's funny because I was just talking to somebody because I used to be a personal trainer in 2014. It's kind of when I first got, in some repercussions, and I was like, shit, I need to start putting some mass on because I'm looking at, some serious time. So I worked at a gym, got, things going, and I ended up getting pretty big. And everybody that came in there was like, hey, you look like? Yeah. And it was funny because it was a hotel gym. So like, it was an actual gym, but it was in a hotel. So we were getting like new faces every day. So it was like, literally every day, but it's just funny, stuff like that. And honestly, I'd rather take that than some other people. You know what I mean?
There's no question. So good morning, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I actually woke up excited for this. I just knew that, from our, even little talk yesterday that we probably have a lot more in common than we don't, you know what I mean? And, I think what you're doing is a huge, huge service, for people that feel, that there's no way out, or there's no hope, or, there's, almost like suck it up, deal with it, don't talk about it. That's how they want it out now. But, I think mental health is getting a nice platform right now, something we didn't really have. I'm 31. So when I grew up, in my family household, it was just like, don't talk about it, didn't really talk about feelings, didn't really talk about much, so I think that was kind of detrimental, to be honest, but that's just how it was,
Right. Because if we're not talking about what's going on and the effects of what's going on, then we'll never know what's causing these effects. And those inhibitors will remain in place, to keep triggering us. So, yeah, I appreciate that, Cory. And that's essentially what it is for me, is just getting the communities to understand that, first and foremost, this is really our first interaction. We had a brief phone call yesterday. We just met, the day prior, through a mutual friend, Miss Cynthia Goldberg at the F8 Foundation, which has really been great in establishing me with wonderful people and connections. But here again, just like you just said, just from our brief interaction, we have a lot in common. And these are just two individuals. You're in Connecticut. I'm in Florida, right?
No, I'm in Massachusetts.
Massachusetts. I'm sorry. Yeah, Mass, not Connecticut. I knew that. I don't know why I said Connecticut.
Sorry.
But so it's either way, but it's just plucking people out of the crowd and just seeing that we've gone through so many like circumstances. And when I go live on TikTok, right? When I go live on TikTok, I'll meet people and we'll talk about the same thing. And you'll just be amazed at how many people are like, oh, I was incarcerated, or, my father was incarcerated, my brother, my uncle, somebody has been through this system and a family has dealt with it, but nobody's talking about it. And the reason why is because we shun it. You know what I mean? As soon as somebody finds out that we had something to do with prison, we're labeled as a criminal. We're labeled as dangerous. We're labeled as, just whatever comes through that person's mind, but it's all negative,
Right.
And that is what is allowing the system to continue. So it's very important to speak out on what's going on. This is why I'm doing what I do, It's
awesome. Like I said, Cynthia really has been a huge, huge person in my life, since 2015. And I can see why she said nothing but good things about you. And
I appreciate that.
That's her goal right now, I feel. And it's a great way that she's been approaching it too, because she waits for me to get a certain amount of clean time in my head to be, not foggy anymore, because she knew my potential even before I knew it, So I think she waits for the right time, for the right moment to have people interact with each other, because you know how it goes, like, somebody that's, I don't know, freshly, maybe a couple months clean, or just in general with life experience, street experience. And it's harder to relate to somebody, not saying you can't, but she just waits for that perfect time. And I thought about that the other day. I'm like, I really feel like everything is just, I don't think it's a coincidence. I think everything happens for a reason. And like I said, I think it's the time and the right place for it, for us to just, connect and, really, open up the doors for, just bigger, better things. And honestly, just that, if somebody, at least one person out of these interviews, takes something from it, that's a plus for us. You know what I mean? Like we do stuff like this and we talk about this stuff because we know how it is, you know what I mean? And we know that person just needs that little bit of, hope, because hope goes a long way. And I was always that firm believer that, it's just, I used to use that mentality, man. I would close-minded, use my age as like a way for me to keep doing what I was doing. And honestly, one day it just, clicked, and it's funny because we all say that awakening moment, you know what I mean? Like in your life, I'm sure, and then in my life, it was like, you can almost like go to that like one instance where it just switches. Mm-hmm. And it comes out of nowhere sometimes. And, for me, it's all about that repercussions, but those repercussions I feel saved my life. So that's, it's just crazy.
Well, the brilliance of Cynthia again, and I think a lot of that brilliance comes from the fact that she's been through the grind, so she understands the mechanics like anybody that goes through it. She's not an outside spectator, and she understands, the right place and the right time. She understands that, and I think that's where she marvels in her beauty at. But everything that you said is spot on and is true. And this is why, like with my channel, I'm not worried about likes and subscribes or view count for that. For first and foremost, YouTube pulled my monetization, so I'm not really here to highlight and promote their channel, but it's access to many, many people. And as long as the right people are watching my videos, right? For example, I have an individual by the name of Demel Dukes, right? That's in prison under this felony murder law. And Demel Dukes was involved in a robbery that ended up being a murder. He was not the trigger man, right? He would just went in for the gas station robbery, and his co-defendant ended up killing the man, and then they ran out or whatever. They both get felony life now because the juvenile law changed, right? The trigger man was 17 at the time, I believe. He was found, as a juvenile, but now that the law had changed, he gets to come home in 4 or 5 years, where DeMel Dukes is stuck in prison for life. Right. So
Jesus.
We ran that interview, and lo and behold, right, I get a comment from the victim's family. Right. And in that comment, you can go on YouTube under the DeMel Dukes and for the listener and see the comments. They're there. But in that comment, he says that he is the grandchild of the one that was murdered. He explains, the negative effect that this crime had on his family and whatnot. But at the end, he said that DeMel Dukes was the only one to show remorse through trial. The trigger man that's getting ready to come home showed no remorse and was actually staring the family down, like Mad Dog and the family throughout the trial. DeMel Dukes was the only one to show remorse, and his family was the only one to apologize, for the crime. And DeMel has shown nothing but remorse and humbleness throughout his whole sentence. So I reached back out, and he reached back out to me. He said he would like to come on the show and discuss, right, the events, and I'm waiting to hear back on that. So there's a lot of pressure on that, because you're talking about the victim's family now coming forward, speaking in defense of this man coming home. So this is why I build the channel, for that to happen. I wouldn't care if I got 10 views, but if it was just that one view that can change this person's life, that's the only view I'm looking for, like you said. So that's what, again, this is what the outreach is, so let's get into you, Cory. Who are you?
So yeah, that was just, that's the stuff I love. Before I even say about those are just what needs to happen. And it sucks that, these YouTube are so, it's political based. Let's call it how it is. It's all political based. So like I said, I respect that. But my name's Cory Cheney. I was born in Framingham, but I was raised out of Marlborough, Mass. I don't know if you ever heard about Marlborough, Mass. It's like it's like 20 minutes from Worcester. Worcester is where I reside now, but Marlborough is like literally like, most of my years, that's where I grew up. I went to Marlborough Public Schools, and and then before we get too much into like going into that term, so I had a very crazy upbringing, and it was one of those things that I think it was so normal for me to go through that. So for me to be able to kind of go back and be like, well, where did things go, to that point? It was almost like chaos was normal. So I everything that I did, and it was chaos, it was just like an everyday occurrence, So it didn't really like feel like it was anything out of the blue. But I'd go to certain friends' house, and I'd be like, wow, like they don't have that going on in their house, and like it's not that I was judging in a sense, but it was more or less eye-opening at times. So I have a sister and a brother, and my oldest brother is 8 years older than me. My sister's 4, so we're all 4 years apart. But me and my sister have the same mom and dad. Me and my brother have same mother, different dads. So
your brother's half. You and your sister are full, and you're half brother.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
From my early remembrance, I remember DCF already in the picture, because my dad was, I'd call him like a fair weather dad, almost like he would come in and out and like acted like he was, doing great, but it was doing more harm than good, to be honest, because it was always manipulation and making let's make your mother feel bad because of what's going on, or let's just talk shit. And it was just like something I I saw that at an early age, and I was already had that mindset of like, wow, like I kind of already knew what manipulation was and kind of like what he was doing. So I never would try to feed into it too much. And it's crazy because that's like, I was getting that at like 6, 7, 8, I was already having that sense. And so what happened was, so DCF was in the mix a lot because my dad was physical, things happened. And then out of they boom, my sister gets like sick. And we don't know really what it was. And they diagnosed it as cat scratch fever at the time. But later on, come to find out, after she is in so much pain, she's in school, right? Hits her liver on the desk and in absolute pain, like ambulance had to come. Like that's like abnormal, you know what I mean? Like that there's something really wrong. And my mom was stressing to the doctors, check for cancer, check for cancer, check for cancer. And they never did. They said, no, all this stuff, right? So my mom is now pleading with them, which is absurd, check for cancer. And lo and behold, she has stage 4 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She has 18 tumors on her liver. So yeah, and it could have been, almost stopped earlier, or once it stopped, but like it could have
been noticed earlier.
Right. And it's like my mom, could have, was pleading with them. And it's just so crazy how like, that's just accountability, it's just like, anything that we'll talk about today is just like accountability, and so my sister's really sick, and now I'm only 8. So she's really young. She's only 12. So I don't, because the chaos and everything that was happening, like, I don't really know what's going on. Right. So I was a wild child. So like, I could run amok and just nothing would happen because of circumstances, like sadly, you know what I mean? Because there wasn't so much attention on me. Obviously there needed to be attention on my sister. Right. So that's kind of like where a lot of things would happen in my life, that kind of like, how we always try to go back, like, where did things start going wrong, or where do you see where
we're supposed
things,
to,
what I mean?
Yes,
that's called working on yourself, right? And so yeah, so my brother, he was actually 16 at the time, and he was a goalie from Marlboro High, very, very good goalie. Like, so he was very popular in high school. So like, what would happen was my mom, she worked at Raytheon for 16 years. Very good job. And since my dad was, that fair weather fan, he always showed up once to the hospital. And my mom had to quit her job, or like leave her job and to be at the hospital all the time because, my sister, she was in bad shape. And, so that took away now. So my dad's not in the picture really.
And this is your sister's dad, right?
Yeah. And so now my brother, he pretty much stepped up as like the father. You know what I mean? He took it as a role of like, okay, well, we don't have really anybody right now for the most part. Because my grandparents were working. They were still working at the time at Raytheon. And so there was no eyes on me and my brother. And my brother was like a wild child too, and crazy. Kind-hearted at the time, but like very crazy. So I was at 8 going to high school parties. He was taking me everywhere I went. I mean, it was awesome for me. But I got exposed to a lot of shit that, kids at that age shouldn't have saw. And I don't blame him. I don't blame anybody. I don't blame any of those circumstances of what, what happened to me later on, because I think at the end of the day, even though you're around certain things, I feel like by blaming people, you don't get past that hump. You know what I mean? You don't play the victim too much because, well, shouldn't play it at all, but you know how it goes. It's just like, gotta pursue and gotta, press through. And that's what I did. And like, like I said, I had to grow up really early, really quick, but I didn't have any really eyes on me. Right. So the first time I ever smoked weed, I was 8 with my brother and his friends, and and obviously they think that's hilarious and funny. They got this
the
young
little kid
kid
high, yeah, like they're getting their dog high, yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking. When I was thinking about that, and it was, I mean, like I said, I know I shouldn't have been around that stuff, but those are like awesome moments I had, because what brother doesn't want to be hanging out with their older brother at that time, even though the circumstances were bad because of that. But for us to eat, like my mom, even though she made good money, but she had 3 kids to raise on her own. My dad did nothing. He still has not paid child support to this day. Till this day, not a dime. So like he doesn't have his license and all that stuff because of that. So you get like a kind of picture on who he is, right? So and I so I really took what my brother did as like, okay, this is what we need to do. He sold drugs, then he got like really kind of like selling big time stuff. But he always like, I never touched that when I was young because he would scare the hell out of me. Like he knew I was going to see it at some point. So he was just like, listen, if you touch this, you're going to die. Like he would scare me. Right. So I always like, it was like, I was seeing like acid, and meanwhile, I'm like 8 or 9. Right. And I know all this shit already. It's like there was like a stack of acid strips, back in the day. They said, well, papers, I think they still do it. The papers. Yeah.
LSD.
Yep, for like raves and all that shit. That was like that scene then, right? Now,
what year
we're
is
looking
this?
at? So that was 1998, or like, and then into like 1999. So that was like the rave scene, and like
I was in.
What was it? The Chronic album? Remember that came out? The Dr.
Yeah,
Dre?
Man. Yeah. I was deep. I was lost at that point. You couldn't tell me nothing there.
And I'm bumping that stuff at my age, like hanging out with my brothers, listening to like Nas and Jay-Z and all that stuff. So it's like I was like reciting, like I'm thinking about it now, like lines that were like, oh my God, like at that age you listen to that shit. Yeah. But like I said, I mean, no matter how like crazy this seems, like how it like kind of started, it's just like my brother always would try to reel it in when he saw that something was kind of like, catching me smoking cigarettes and, like stuff like that. He only wanted to do it, like, he didn't want me doing it without him. Like, or if I, him thinking like, okay, this is a way that I can control it. Meanwhile, he's only 16, so you can't like, he's still a kid himself.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you, did that music influence you at all?
No. I think I was too young to grasp the substance behind it. I knew, how I could recite lines, but it doesn't mean that I really knew what was going on. Because I'd be honest, that wasn't the thing that steered me into a certain kind of point. Because you'll hear later on, like it really wasn't, But was it an impact in my life? And I something I always remember. Yeah. And it always brings back memories, listen to certain songs and stuff. So I don't take it as that. But yeah, so so I'm with, my brother all the time, like, cause he's selling drugs, and for us to eat, because, they weren't really leaving money. My mom was in the hospital. Literally, they were like living at the hospital because my sister was on like life support for like 6 months. The chemo, radiation, all that stuff wasn't even working. So it was bad. You know what I mean? It was like real bad. But I didn't know what was going on. You know what I mean? Like I knew my sister was sick, but I didn't know how bad it was. Right. So like I'm going to like these like cool events and not knowing like, hey, this is like some serious shit. This is the reason why you're like kind of like around this stuff. But my brother always tried to like be that supportive, role to make sure that I was okay and that we always had something to eat. I always had money in my pocket. He would make sure I was taken care of. So he stepped up big time, even though it wasn't like good things, but people don't understand when like you're from like the streets and how like things, go. That is survival. That is what needs to happen in circumstances that are not the best hands that were dealt. And like I said, I would never trade anything in that I've gone through. And I think that's something that, like I said, it shaped me early. Like literally, like it kind of like I said, it didn't. like those musics and those things didn't influence me, but it also those are where my roots are. You know what I mean? That's where I learned a lot of things. And like I said, his memories are like insane. And so what ends up happening is we're getting a little older. Like I said, my sister's still in the hospital. And so one day, we're going to the hospital. I guess, yeah, my mom called and said, told me and my brother, like, you guys got to get up to the hospital. So apparently what they were doing on the side was with like my grandmother, my grandfather, you know, the people that were like involved in our family. You know, they said, listen, we got to start picking out, you know, some burial plots and caskets and all that stuff, because it doesn't look like she's going to make it. So they just told me that part, but all the other things, they clearly, as an adult, they would be doing that stuff. I wouldn't be, but
yeah, just stuff that you hear from the side and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you're catching little conversations here and
tidbits,
there.
and you try to put it together,
Yeah, and like I said, it's just like I knew something was bad, but I didn't know how bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
So fast forward a little bit. Now it's getting real, right? So now, like, you know, now the final rites, you know what I mean? When they come in and they, you know, they do the oil, they don't do it for everybody, but they do it for, you know, it's a religious and it's a very good way to get the whole family together to be in the same moment for the same thing. So I remember vividly, you know, being in the hospital and them putting the oil on our forehead and, you know, everybody's saying, you know, prayers and goodbyes and all this, because we didn't know if like when it was going to happen, but it seemed like it was going to happen very soon. So when we were there, you know, we came back. Like I said, I was so young, so it's not like, you know, grief. I didn't know how to handle grief or anything in that sense. Like I didn't know what was going on really, right? So out of nowhere, right? Now this is shit that's in the books now, and this is like, you don't believe in God. I don't know what to say to you. You know, like, you know, I know people have to have experiences, right? But so, like I said, the chemo and all that stuff wasn't working, right? Nothing shrank, nothing did anything. She had 18 tumors on her liver, 18. So after she got, you know, the final rites, and I'm not even joking. This is, like I said, this is all in the medical books and everything. Out of nowhere, like 2 days later, all of a sudden the tumors just started shrinking out of nowhere. The doctors were like, we haven't been doing chemo or any kind of radiation anymore, so we don't know what's going on. So little by little, they just started shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and then to a point where now, boom, she's off life support, right? Everybody's like, holy shit, like what is going on? Yeah. And then you know, little by little, she had to learn how to like walk, talk, like walk, you know, everything again. You know, she lost all her hair, everything, right? It was right. It makes you think, right? Like, holy shit, you know. And I always remember too, like my grandmother, right, prayed every single day. She said every single day she would pray for her. She did not miss one day. And I think that was a lot to do with, like, if you saw my grandmother, she is your definition of the grandmother of the year. Like, her name's Dottie. Like, how grandmother of a name can that be, right? And she's just a sweetheart, you know. And she was like the one that always kind of kept the family, even though our family was so nuts and chaotic.
The matriarch,
you know, she kept things glued. And you know, like I said, out of nowhere, things started, you know, getting better and better. And, you know, I'm getting older, but like, you know, like I said, I'm still, you know what I mean? I'm hanging out with my brother, seeing things I probably shouldn't be seeing. And, you know, after, I think it was about a couple years, so 12, 13, I think she was in there for like, no lie, like a year and a half in the hospital. And, so like I said, she's getting much better now, and now she's able to come home. Like, she's in remission, like that. She's the only one in the whole world that has ever survived that cancer at that stage and how progressive and how many tumors. There's no one in the world that's ever survived it. She had like a 0.00001, chance of survival. And the only other girl that had that kind of was actually the daughter of the founder of Make-A-Wish. So we were really close to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, like, because I was able to go to like Paul Newman camp. Like that shit was insane. Those are it's for families, the ones that got affected by it, right? They don't have cancer, but they were the sisters or the brothers or of that person. And Paul Newman, like he like was all about for cancer and all that. So like we got to go to like we were having like manhunts 1,000 on 1,000 on 1,000 on 1,000. Like that's how many kids were there. Thousands. It was like the best time of my life, like because it was like you forgot about all the chaos and all the craziness that was going on, right? Yeah. Just for that little bit of time, you got to
just a moment of positivity and joy. People were happy. You didn't have to. There was no.
There was no worries. And it was like it was always funny too to reflect there because like I find out like how much my growth is so much beyond other people just for what I was kind of around. Because these kids talked about this and like in my head I'm thinking like I'm already thinking about girls and shit and like all these things. It was just like it was thinking back now, the growth level of how quick I did grow up was definitely an issue, but I made the best of it, you know what I mean? And I was like like I said, my brother was like, he ended up, like I said, him and his friends were they were tight knit, like they were all hockey players. That kind of bond with hockey guys, just like that really tight knit group, right? Mm-hmm. So this kid Preston, he didn't play hockey, but he was, around my, my friends and all that. I mean, my brother's friends, and like he seemed like he was like a second brother to me. His name was Preston McCauley, and so now we're setting up to go to Make-A-Wish because now my sister's better. So now we're going to go to, Florida for, for a week, all expenses paid, everything you can possibly think of. Our own, like, it was like, our own, like, I don't even know how to explain it, like a village just for us. Like we had our own like village.
Yeah.
And like, you got catered and it was the most amazing thing I've ever, been around. But what happened earlier, just before all that, stuff happens, my brother's, Preston was, like I said, very, very close to me. Like he loved baseball. I love baseball. My brother wasn't really a baseball guy, but so I was always able to play catch with him, and he was just an awesome guy, right? He actually, a year before that, took a hit on my brother's he had the acid. Mm-hmm. He actually took a hit at 16, did a full year for and he didn't say anything. It was my brother's stuff he was holding. So he took the rap for all of it, right? So he was like that was the guy, he was a really, really good guy. And like I said, him and my brother would, brawls, like they were always together. They always took care of each other. But so one night, I guess, this girl was either drinking or whatever. Preston was in the back. There was two other girls, and then the driver, and on the passenger side. I guess it was speeding around this, bend on a back road, and it was like an Explorer type. So how they're kind of like they're easy to flip.
Yep.
Driving like an idiot. So yeah, she was driving like an idiot. Lost control. It flipped the car, and Preston got ejected out the window, like a super. He didn't have a seatbelt on, so it was like a Superman effect. But it was like they were going like 50, 60 miles an hour. Like so, it projected him out, and then he hit a tree head on, like a head on to a tree at that speed. Collapsed, and then I guess they kind of all like crawled out, and they looked at him, and because he's the only one that got ejected. And he stood up and he was like, "What happened?" And then just collapsed. And then he died right there. So, that was devastation to our,
So
family.
So Preston hit the tree?
Yeah. So like when he got ejected out the window.
He got ejected and he flew into the tree, not the car.
Right.
And then he stood up and said what happened and then collapsed. But what was the damage that ultimately deceased him?
That killed him. Well, they still don't know how he even got up because everything was shattered. It must have been of his adrenaline.
Yeah.
I guess like shit was like there was some organ that like split in half. Like it was like that's how hard the impact was, right? They don't, like I said, I don't even know how he even had the strength to get up. And you know, that shit was like insane because, you know, I'm really young, right? And Preston's like a brother to me. And like I said, my mom she meant well. She just didn't know how to parent all that well. So she at 2 a.m. comes walking in my room and just says, "Hey, Preston died." And I'm like, "What?" I'm thinking it's like a dream, right? So I don't know. And like I said, I'm only like 10 years old, 9, 10. And then she just leaves the room. And then I'm like, all right. Like now I'm like, can't go to bed. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, good mom just doesn't know how to, she just didn't really know how to parent. Like, I don't want to bash her because she is a good person.
Well, yeah, it's just, you know, in these instances, like you say, the reflection, it's looking back and knowing that these people, my parents, your parents, our parents, you know, were just trying to survive. Like your mom probably had the pressures of the world on her in the moment. She's got bills. She's got all this shit. Now she's got to deal with your best friend. She don't know. She don't have time for this stuff. You know what I mean? And it's just, listen, your best friend is just got killed and went back to figuring out bills or who, whatever, you know, and as us as adults, you know, now that helped me with my grieving and my blame as what we said earlier, because it allowed me to process and step out of me blaming and saying, well, before I blame this, let me just look at life from their shoes. How were they making decisions? What kind of pressures were they under making these decisions? You know, because now I'm at their age where they had me at. And I'm sitting there asking myself, in my current condition, would I be able to raise a child accurately and wholesome? There's no way. You know what I mean? There's no way. So that helped me a lot with blaming them, was just understanding that they did the best that they could with the shit that they had going on, you know?
Perfectly put, just like that, you know, and it took me a long time to really get that grasp. It wasn't like I was blaming, to be honest. Like I said, I took accountability kind of early. Did I have some reservations on shit? Yeah. But, you know, that was perfect. I pretty much can't say it any better than that. Cause, you know, I try to reflect and say, damn, like at her age, dealing with that, you know, the guy that she was with, you know, isn't doing shit, isn't shit. And like, you know, dealing with her daughter almost dying. Now, not only all that shit, but she had to step up. We had like I'm not even kidding, because like we got very blessed when it came to like foundations and like people, you know, donate. Like we got taken care of because how devastating this whole thing was and how like impactful it was to, you know, all of us. And you know, people did us right, like, and as like a community, they stepped up huge, and I can never fully thank them enough. Like I said, I didn't have the grasp to even know how to do that, but thinking back now, like shit, you know, people did some good stuff. Like my mom we had a hospital room literally like in her room, right? Like, so her trying to go to school, but you know, that's when the cameras first came out, and it was like the evolution of like everything, right? Of like at that time, just think of like where technology was at. And
right.
So she, you know, is trying to do the best she can, and she had to know how to like administer certain stuff. Like I said, my sister was on like, this is when I had to like remember back when I first heard about fentanyl coming around, and that she was getting the strips, the things back in the day, and not even knowing, like, you know, now not even knowing what the hell that was. But that's how sick she was and how much in pain she was. And like I said, she had like, you know, the braces for a while, how to like walk again. And it was bad, like real bad. But my mom stepped up and learned so much shit as like almost like a nurse. She turned into like a nurse. And like, I still always tell her to this day, I'm like, man, I wish you took on like, or even went, and I know it's a lot. You got to go to schooling for a lot. My mom's, great mom, but she, academic wise, she wouldn't have been able to handle that. But like learning that kind of stuff and helping her daughter, like that was like amazing. Now thinking about it, like, I don't know how she did it. I don't know how she got through it. Like I said, there was some really,
that's what women
times.
do, man. That's what women do. Women find a way to get it done, man.
They do. They just step up, and she became like the mother and the father. But I already, you know what I mean? Like my brother was always that intimidator, because he's a lot bigger than me. He's like I said, I'm only like 5'5", not that big, but my brother is like 5'10", because we had different dads. So I always tell him that. I'm like, you lucked out on the height side, buddy. But so he was like the enforcer. You know what I mean? Like if I didn't want to take medicine or something stupid, he'd be like, oh, I'm gonna tell Steve. So fuck, like I'm not trying to do that. Like that was like the deterrence, because I'm telling you, and I think because I didn't fully go off the rails, like when we talk later, but you have to, having that male presence in a home is crucial. I cannot stress that enough of how important a male role model for kids' development, especially boys growing up, of having that male role model to really guide you. And granted, I got that, but in a different form. So think like I had like a father brother, which is so weird. But that's how it was. So he wouldn't just handle things of like, okay, as a brother thing, but it was like, it's almost getting in trouble now. Like, and then it's thinking, I always look back at it that I'm like, holy shit, like, he did step up too, huge. Like I said, I was the youngest out of the whole family. So like, he did what he felt was right. And I can't thank him enough for that. And
these are the issues though too, is because now you have a young man that should be worrying about getting his life in place, getting his career started, and what he's going to do with his life. He's placed in the responsibility of a fatherhood, you know what I mean?
Right.
And has no idea how to even be that. So these are the circumstances. These are the domino effects. So continue.
What's crazy about that too is like, because obviously there's so much you can't. I'm loving this conversation, by the way. This is medicine for us, right? This is stuff that helps us, get our shit out and then process and really evaluate, So, my brother actually, shitty enough, like I said, I remember I told you my mom was a good mom, but she had a lot of faults, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when my father, right? So he was in my life until 5. He was in there sporadically, but he was in my life till 5. My mom lied, and so did he, about who the real father was. So my dad wasn't his dad, but he thought it was his dad. Right? So, and my dad was very abusive.
So your brother didn't know he was a half brother?
No, not at the time. Not when he was really young. No. And you want to know what's crazy is, and these are things that I have a hard time forgiving, not as like a way of like not moving forward, but a way of being like, those are lessons that I would never do, ever. And I'm not here to like I told you, I'm not here to blast anybody. This is what happened.
Just about understanding. Right.
And this is going to help other people, like really just being able to grasp those tough talks that we were never able to do. And like, the fact that he didn't know who his real father was until he was 16. That's fucked up. Beyond fucked up. And that really fucked with him bad.
But was he calling your dad his dad? He was under the impression that this was his father.
Yeah. Yep. Because his father, that he actually has, like I said, there's so many like weird things that happened later on.
So how did he find out?
So I think it slipped up in a conversation, and my brother found out. Like it was like an accidental.
Always comes out, man. The truth always comes out.
And my grandparents, I guess, were trying to say like, you need to tell him. You need to tell him. But they felt like it wasn't their place. But I'm always saying like, damn, like shit, I would have said something. You know what I mean? Like I get it. It's easier said than done, right? But it's also one thing that shouldn't have happened, right? Because my father was a piece of shit. Like, he used to beat on him, all that stuff. So like, he always used to probably feel like, fuck, like why is my dad doing this only to me? Like, why does he treat me like this? You know, that, because he thought about that shit. You know, hearing that later kind of fucked with like me. Like, damn, like, you know, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. And like, you know, and then one thing that I can always say that I'll never forgive was my mom, when she was like 7 months, about 7 months pregnant with me, and my dad used to come home whenever he felt like it, would disappear at days, and my mom just held us, just was a mom, you know what I mean? Like, she said whatever, like, it would just handle her shit. But you know, he put her out in a full blizzard, pretty much, you know, with the clothes she had on, made her sit outside, and had my sister sit at the top of the steps and not let her in until he said so. And my mom's like pounding on the door. I could have got killed. Like, she could have got killed. I could have got killed. And just to think of like a man doing that shit to a female. And that's one thing that always drove me, is I will not put my hands on a female. I will never. You just don't do that shit. Especially if you're married and you got a kid with them like that. And like I said, I ended up finding that stuff out like later, but that stuff was starting to pop around as I got older. So you could see why I didn't want him really around, right? I knew he was my father, but like, he wasn't my father, right? So, and it was just so messed up. And to bring this conversation back where it was leading was, remember we said we were going to Make-A-Wish. I was going there, and
the support of the community and all that.
And what was crazy was going to the Make-A-Wish Foundation to Florida, and Preston died like 2 days before. So he couldn't even go to the funeral. So think of how devastating that was, you know, and we didn't get to go and, you know, process all that shit. And like, these are what I'm kind of tying in of like how like my brother, what he dealt with, you know, at a young age, but stepped up as like, you know, a father figure. But you could see how chaotic shit was, right? Like, shit was just like all over the place, you know, crazy things happening, right? You know, my sister surviving the craziest cancer. She was like on TV. There's like a TV thing they had on her. And like I said, now my brother's trying to deal with the grief of his best friend, because they were going to go to the military together. That was their plan. So yeah, like you said, how my brother, you know, was taking care of me, but he was trying to get his future together, but he wasn't good in school. Like, all the girls did his homework because they knew like what was going on with my brothers, you know, with our family. My sister at that time was still in the hospital, so teachers gave him a pass, right?
Yeah.
So it kind of fucked him up a little bit, because like,
he took advantage of that shit.
He took advantage, but then it also, now he doesn't spell.
It hindered him, right?
Yeah, hindered him, but very, very good with his hands. He owns his own business now. Like I said, we'll get into all these, that like where that ends up going, but yeah, like I said, dealing with that grief, and what's crazy is if I could bring even like a spiritual aspect to this stuff, right? Tying it back in to when Preston died, and when we came back, right, after that trip, which was great, but it was still weird because my brother just wasn't. He was there, but he wasn't there. You know what I mean? And I remember when I was younger, like when that happened, I ended up moving upstairs, right, to the room up there. Yeah, and I swear to God, I was getting like these knocks on my door, and I'm like going and opening, no one there. So I'm like not really thinking too much of it, right? Because I don't know any like what's about to happen, right? Hold on, like this is insane, and I'll document it. So, all of a sudden I'm like, me and my brother are feeling like somebody was like coming and sitting at the edge of the bed. And you saw it kind of like the crease would go down. We're like, what the fuck? Right? And at the time we didn't really, like, I told you that shit happened with my sister, right? So you would think I would have more of a believing of the spiritual, but I was still young. Like, I don't know. I have to see it, feel it, touch it to believe it, right? Mm-hmm. So then all of a sudden shit was getting like even crazier, right? And my brother was like I don't know what's going on, but I think that Preston's still around. I think he hasn't moved on yet because he died tragically, right? Like they say, like that when a soul dies, about I think Joe Rogan said they did this like measurement thing where they put somebody died, right? And then they weighed them right after they died, and they were it was like 3 point something ounces less every time a person. So no matter how big, small they were, that amount was always lower. So they're thinking that's energy that leaves the body, because we all have energy. It's like proven. So that the energy, I'm thinking you die tragically, right? Your energy in your life, you think you're still probably alive, right? Because you haven't crossed on yet. Because you didn't know. You're trying to say goodbye to people, but you don't know what's going on, right? So obviously we don't know all these things, but these are just what we kind of got wrapped together, right? So we met a lady called Maureen in Wyoming. I got to meet like Mick Foley back in the day, the wrestler, the Undertaker. Like that's when I was like
Mick Foley. That was Hacksaw Jim Duggan, wasn't it?
No, well, he was Cactus Jack, Dude Love.
Cactus Jack. That's what I knew him as. Yeah. Cactus Jack. Yeah.
Yeah, Dude Love. And what was insane is that we'd go to these benefits. I'd meet all these celebrities, right? Because it was for cancer, the YME, and all that stuff, right? They were very close to our family because that girl that I told you that started the organization, her daughter died of the same thing that my sister did, because her daughter beat it and then it came back. So she gravitated towards my sister. So we were like in the main circle, not just like in with regular YME. And I don't mean to sound like that's like any more special than whatever people did, but like we got to see a lot of shit, behind the scenes that you would, like I said, it's all documented. Insane. This girl Maureen, right? She was I'll never forget this. She was in that organization as a help, right? Because she had a gift, right? And like I said, I'm still young, so it took me like a while to understand kind of what was going on, right? But super interested. So she thought she was going insane. So she checked herself into a mental hospital, right? And they were like, nothing's wrong with you. You have like, I'm going to refer you to somebody. And it was a priest. She went to the priest, talked to the priest, and all of a sudden the priest said, listen, you have a gift. And his name is Michael, the Archangel Michael, was talking to her. And her gift was so strong and so big, and for like the organization she was at, that for a while she was finding missing children through America's Most Wanted. So she helped them out for a while, finding missing kids, dead or alive, because all the information was coming up right from Michael, right? But they wanted to hire her on full time, but she couldn't, because you can't take money from an organization when you have a gift. Like all these like scam artists, people that do that shit, they're not supposed to. They probably have the gift, but they're not supposed to take money for it. And that's like forbidden. It's like using yourself or using your gift as extortion, So she started working for YME, right? Because like obviously you still got to make a living, but you also can't use your gift as like a way to make money. So she worked for the organization, and so how I told you all that shit was going on in my house, like the knocking on the door, like. My brother was he got a call, literally a voicemail from Preston's mother, but it was Preston. He saved it for like years. It goes, hey, Steve, right, with Preston's voice. And then it goes right to his mother's voice. Like that it gives me goosebumps even thinking about that. It was his voice. You cannot decipher his voice from his mother. It was so different. And he saved that forever. Like I don't know if he still has that phone. It was like the first phones in Nokia. Remember those ones? Yep. So anyways, so my brother's having a hard time with this shit now. Now like stuff's picking up a little bit, and I'm getting freaked out. Like I'm leaving my room and jumping in. Yeah, I'm like, Steve, I'm not sleeping alone. And start jumping in bed, and so my mom, went. Talked to Maureen and was like, hey, listen, this is what's going on with my son, blah blah blah. She didn't even give him that much details, right? Because the crazy thing is that's her gift. Like, you don't even have to really say anything. And so I am only like 10 years old, right? Sitting in my living room, and my brother's there, Maureen, and a couple other people, right? So she talks to Steve and says, "Hey, somebody wants to talk to you." And brother was like, because my brother went into that like, hell no, like that shit ain't real. Like, he did not believe in that, right?
Right.
And then all of a sudden he looks at her and I look at her, and you could like feel, and I don't know what to call it, but there was like, you could feel energy in that, like somebody else was there but wasn't, like a higher form, right? And her eyes roll back to her head, and Michael was talking for Preston to Steve and said, "Hey, like, listen, that is me, and I just wanted to say I'm okay. I didn't want to cross on yet. I just wanted to let you know that, I love you, and like, take care." And dude, like, everybody was bawling, it was, and she was even telling stories that only my brother knew in Preston, nobody else. That's what confirmed him to like believe, holy shit, like, this is real, like this is actually happening. Like, and like I said, I'm not the only one that was there. It was like the whole, and they can all vouch for it. It's insane. And after that, right, nothing, no more knocking, no more. It's like she made that happen, right? So it's like the stuff that I went through from such a young age to just like 10 years old, like, people felt bad. That's why I got away with a lot. Now, like, kind of bringing it back to me is like, I would almost like do shit just to do it because I knew I could get away with it, right? And it was manipulation at such a young age. I had such a manipulating behavior because that's how my dad was. And like, no matter how much I tried to fight, that's fucked up, and I hate it. But the more I didn't want to be like my dad, I saw character traits that I did have, and it really pissed me off because I told myself I will never ever be like him. Like, I will never put my hands on females. I'm not going to be that way. But it's not like I put hands on my female, but there was drug addiction in the family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mental health, like my grandmother on his side was that lady that talked to herself, that crazy lady, but she meant well, obviously, but oh man, yeah. So it was, I got hit with that stick of like mental health and his addiction too. There you go. Dual diagnosed, right? But I never, when all this stuff was going on, right? Because my sister ended up, because she lost her teen years and she got better. She recovered and all that. She rebelled like you wouldn't believe, like like a bat out of hell, like, she wanted to make up for all the years that she lost. So she went out and she just was out of her mind, right? And it caused like turmoil, like huge turmoil, like, because like, listen, this is a girl that shouldn't be here, like she should not be alive at all. Right. But when somebody goes to that, like, I can't say how that feels, right? So I can only imagine why she did the shit she did, because she didn't feel like she felt like she lost her 2 years, and running away, doing whatever she wanted to do, to a point where now I think my mom has so much on her plate, dealing with bills or whatever. Now things are bad because she lost all that. She lost Raytheon, and she was making like $35 an hour back in the day. So think of like all that money that she could, what I mean, like all gone. That 16 years, boom, gone. And so my sister rebelled so bad to the point where my mom couldn't even handle her anymore. Just couldn't. She always ran away, and she ended up had to put her in DYS just so she knew where she was. Not saying I believe in all that shit, but like it's what needed to happen at that time.
What is DYS?
DYS is like a group home, like for kids that are wild, reckless, and it's a step before jail. So they put you in like that. It's almost like a section, but you're not an adult, so you can't section a younger kid, right? So that's the way of that. That's like, we'll put it that way. That's like a mini section, right? For younger kids that just do not listen, do not,
unmanageable,
correct.
As they deem
So
unmanageable. Yeah.
Right. Which, there's obviously underlying issues, obviously. And it's hard to discipline somebody that you knew that just survived that kind of shit. Like, how do you even, it's so hard. I can't even fathom doing that. So like all that shit that my mom had to deal with, that's why I always go back to saying like, listen, I knew she tried her best, with certain things. And, things were just out of her control. Like my mom is only 4'10". She's tiny. So but she was scrappy, I mean, I used to see her beat the brakes off of some of the girls that, we're in our apartment and causing ruckus for the kids. And that's what I was like, damn, my mom is crazy as hell. I wonder why I'm nuts. But yeah, so that's, like I said, it was just like something out of her control in a sense. But, you could see where the chaos started happening. And we just, as a group, we're just wild childs. And like I said, I had a great, so where my addiction, where I started seeing, because I smoked at 8, right? I drank a shot that same night. So I technically smoked and drank for the first time. I remember it was like a shot of vodka, and I'm only like 8 or 9 years old. And oh my God, I was like the worst thing I ever tasted in my life. Right. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm never doing that again. Like and shit like that. But it actually was crazy because my brother told me the reason why he did that shit, which this is his logic, right, behind it, is he's like, oh, I was just going to try to get it out of your system. I'm like, what? But that's his thought process at that age, right? So you can't like fault him on it. But it's funny to kind of look back and be like, well, I mean, I guess if you're really thinking like that, but, and it kind of did in a sense, because from like 13, I would say, to like 15, I didn't smoke or do anything like that. I played baseball. Baseball was my thing, right? So, I ended up, really falling in love with the sport. So, when I started hitting high school, I went to a trade school. It's called Aspen Valley in Marlboro. So it's a tech school. So you can learn a trade and, academics. And so I ended up taking up carpentry. So, because my brother, started a business in 2001. He was like 21 years old because he got his life back together. Like I said, he was on like chins and all that shit. He was, like I said, he was fucking, chins is like almost like you have a probation officer and everything, right? So, yeah, he was fucking nuts. Like I said, and I remember seeing fights, like we'd go to places and shit would pop off, and I'd just be that little kid just sitting there like excited because my brother was nuts. So like he didn't lose many. I didn't see him ever lose a fight. And I seen him get into fights all the time, like beating the bag out of people, like, and it's just his mentality. Like now thinking, like, look at the bullshit he went through. Didn't even know who the fuck his dad was until he was 16, right? And then he has all this pent up anger. He doesn't like to talk about any feelings or nothing, right? So that was like his way of kind of like, escaping and letting his aggression out, take it out on some other people. And he actually, like, I'm really exposing some shit on it, but I don't care. Like, this is my time to really just put, because a lot of people, I told them about this podcast and like what you were doing, what you were trying to accomplish in a sense, of like, and like I said, I love the message, and I told them like, hey, I'm going to be speaking on this podcast. Like, if you guys didn't know all the shit that I went through, I'm putting it all out there because I want people to know. Yeah, because if you think about it, like, I feel like my first big podcast on, with a guy that's, aligned with the same views of mine, I want to put so people know who the fuck they know who I am, and I'm not going to sugarcoat shit, and I'd rather.
Well, history has to be told. History has to be told, and it has to be told accurately, because this is for documentative purposes, because how I'll summarize all of this in the end will just wrap up again, just things that goes on in every community, damn near almost every household, Right. So like the things that you're saying, is gonna resonate with so many people. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep. And I think it's amazing too, because it's really like, that's my truth. This is what, I went through and why kind of things spiraled the way they did. And like I said, and I said right off the rip, I'm not blaming anybody.
Mm-hmm.
I take accountability. Trust me, it took me a while to get that part, but
Mm-hmm.
that's called growth, and growth takes time. Most times addiction in itself takes, 1, 2, 3, 4. You never know. And it's the whole point is if you mess up, you have to get back to it, because if you don't, that's where you're not guaranteed another day in life, because look at our statistics are not on our side right now, for what's going on. But it doesn't mean that you have to be, you know what I mean? You can be that person that can change. And, if I can have a message that kind of resonates with, just anybody, I feel like anybody can take that, run with it, and have hope and succeed. And like, I heard stories that definitely helped me, help me get my shit together in a sense, and even like caring about your, so I don't know everything, but just from what Cynthia told me, like you've been through a lot. So it's like, knowing and talking to somebody that's been through a lot, that's even better. That's why we're doing this, is like I said, it's like, this is like our medicine. Like, this is what we do to, get better and spread the message. Cause you obviously been very, very suppressed by the political side of all the bullshit that's going on. So, it's good that hopefully, they get my ass on there. They're going to freaking ban me on there.
Yeah.
I don't hold back. And like I said, so kind of going back to that, with my brother and my sister and like where we were at as a family unit, it was very chaotic. So my sister never graduates, high school, which is sad, and we were all trying to like I was very good at school. Well, I wouldn't say I was very good in school. From when I was young, I was that type that didn't have to study and I could still get manageable grades. And I in high school, once it got to that point, like I was like a pretty good athlete, in ASVAB. I did my work, didn't really have to study, and I got to mess around. Teachers didn't know how to really handle that. You know what I mean? Because what do you discipline him? He's getting good grades.
Right.
What? And he's an athlete. Like, what do we do? Like,
right.
You can't, like, they try to discipline me. I didn't listen. Like, I was very rebellious, but
yeah, they couldn't figure out how to challenge you. No.
And my nephew, right? Actually, even the break on that, my sister was never supposed to have kids because of chemo, radiation, all that stuff. You're not supposed to have them. So just another miracle shit happened. She has 5 kids. 5 kids. Yeah. And actually one of them, Thomas, is like who I kind of was. And I can see where he's just turned 15, right? 6'4", like 2 something. The monster already. He didn't get his dad gene from our side.
And he just turned what?
From 15.
15?
Yeah, he's huge.
Good God.
Yeah. Plays basketball and all that. But I'm finding out he's hanging out with certain, I got to kind of, put his ass into shape, make sure, my brother's doing a good job with that too. Okay. So that stuff ends up happening. Like my sister gets pregnant at like 18 and she was like a runaway. She ran from DYS, met this guy, which he was no good, but he was on the run. So it was just like a chaotic kind of scene, but my mom tried her hardest to keep, her from not going off too much to deep end, right? But she ended up, her first child my mom ended up taking custody of her, so that she could have a better, like, because you know what the hell my sister was gonna do, because like I said, she has the genes like my father, the bipolar, and we don't even know still to this day, she's got to get checked on certain things because of what she went through, right?
Of course, yeah.
And when you're on life support for that long, that fucks your brain up bad. The oxygen to your brain, and it's just, I feel like that's a very crucial thing that happened. Yeah, and that's why, like I said, like our family, like I said, is very toxic and always fighting, and I could see why, like, she would say things like wild. You would be like, what the fuck? Where did that come from? But it's just, it wasn't her fault. I couldn't always blame her in a sense, because I felt like there was a lot of underlying issues that she just didn't deal with yet. And like I said, mental health wasn't like a thing to talk about, right? At that time. And nobody really discussed it. And they tried to do counseling. I literally went in there and didn't say a word. The lady was like, I don't even know what to do. So like they kind of tried to do what they could because of like what happened, you know, in our family. So now it comes to high school. You know, now it's like I have all this freedom now. I kind of like my mom's got custody of my sister's kid, right? I'm still in high school. I'm only 15. So I'm an uncle already at 15. And so now I'm pretty much doing, you know, great, doing good in school. You know, I'm smoking, drinking on the weekends like that. I was still able to do that and function, you know, in school and get good grades, right? So so when it came time to like, I thought because like my brother was a carpenter, right? My uncle was a carpenter. I thought it was just like in our family, like it was just going to be something I'm going to do, right? But not really knowing I didn't want to do that. Like I only did it to appease, I guess, you know, my brother and to think that was like, but you know, I knew deep down, like that's just something I'm definitely not going to do. Like, but you know, that's where all the trials and tribulations end up happening because I mean, nobody at 18 knows what the fuck they want to do with their life. Like, could you think of anything at that age that you would be like, okay, this is definitely what I'm doing? I didn't want to get into debt.
Nothing realistic.
Right. And I didn't want to go to college and go into debt. Like I said, my experiences and who I hung out with, like almost, you know, like I said, I was 8 and I'm hanging out with people double my age, like 16. And so like, as I got older, I knew more about things than other people did.
Right.
And not just because I was smart or whatever, it was because of what I was surrounded with. Right. So like I had to grow up quick. And so I knew, don't go into college if you don't think you're doing that trade or whatever that is, because you're going to get into debt. I saw friends that were already in college, right? And they were like pissed that they even did it because now they owe all this, you know, money back. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not. So I took the route, you know, into something I quote unquote didn't want to do, but I felt like, I'm like, shit, well, whatever. I'll just do it for a little bit, appease. I'm still partying on the weekend. Like by being in Aspet, there's at the time it was 9 different towns. So like you got to branch out to all these different towns, these house parties where you meet all these people, and then that person lives there. So your base is very spread out. So I had so many different groups of friends because of different areas.
Got it. Yeah.
Which was awesome. I honestly think most people should go to tech schools. Always have a backup plan, right? And what's it called? I went at it. Let's just say when my friends were going off to college or whatever, and then I was like doing my thing, like that's where things started taking off. That's when I was like, you know, didn't get a job right away as I got out in 18. Like I was still going and partying and doing all that shit. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're young, you think like that's life. Like this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna party like crazy. And I didn't get in any hard drugs yet. So I was, you know, smoking here and there, and then I was drinking, but I kind of like was that type that drank to black out. Like I do things too excessive. Like it was never enough, right? So obviously I was smaller than a lot of people, so like I'm trying to keep up with
your tolerance, right?
I had friends that were monsters, like huge, like wrestlers, like all these, like my buddy Ross, like an absolute tank. And you know, I always tried to be the life of the party, or I always tried to have, you know, fun and try to keep up with everybody. And you know, you chug, you know, one beer, I'm gonna do 2 through a funnel. So it's like that mindset. Yeah, that mindset is what I ended up taking on. And I just remember how like at one point I'm like, I was thinking like, shit, my brother was like, dude, what the fuck are you gonna do with your life? Like he said, like he made like a comment, right? As I was going out, and he saw that, you know, but I ended up getting a job at Monarch Supply, but I was like the receiver. So like I was handling the fork truck and bringing in paint, Benjamin Moore paint, and all checking in all the supplies for the store. So like, you know, it rapidly changed to a full-time job, and I haven't never done that before, right? This is my first like real job as doing like, you know, for a company. And I was doing like 40 plus hours, right? So somebody that hasn't done anything like that and they jump right into that, it's, you know, it's a lot. And I'm trying to do my best, you know, because I'm partying on the weekends and I'm doing
you
this.
still got to
I got all that stuff that I feel like I need to do, right? So I'm not sleeping much, waking up hungover or whatever. And I just remember getting to a point where I was like, fuck, like that's when I saw drugs starting to kind of take over. I saw my buddy was like breaking out of line one time and I didn't know and he's like, oh, it's coke. And I'm like, and I always told myself I was never going to do that because that's what my dad did. My dad, that was his drug of choice. So in my mind, I'm like, I can't do that. Like, but you know how, you know, temptation is a bitch and temptation will hit you when you least expect it.
At your
like
weakest point. Yeah,
it will find its way. It'll bite you like when you're not ready. And that's really what ended up happening is like, you know, I tried that and I was like, oh shit. And like I said, that was my first one. So you know, it's like that, you're never going to even hit this, like savor it now, buddy, because that ain't coming back. So, you know, that's what happened. And I was very, like, I think I had like a very addictive personality and it ended up showing in drugs. So like I would obsess. And even with baseball, you could even stem it back to when I was younger, right? Like if I went like 2 for 4, I was pissed because I'm like, well, why didn't I go like 2, 3 for 4, 4 for 4? Like, you know, I was very critical of myself at a young age, and I was very competitive, like super competitive, like where it's bad. And so when that kind of happens, it really shifts you to a point of like obsession, right? And how obsession can turn, you know, really bad. And that's what ended up happening is just like I had all these groups of friends, so there was always something going on, right?